A war is being fought over the Sahara Desert, and the United States is involved. American weapons are taking their toll. I spent 5 weeks in the war zones. This is the first in-depth American report on what could become a superpower conflict.
This program is made possible by a grant from the Independent Documentary Fund, which is supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ford Foundation, the Program Fund of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by public television stations, and by additional grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Samuel Rubin Foundation, the William and Mary Grieve Foundation, and by the Albert Kunstadter Family Foundation.
The war is being fought here, in the Western Sahara, in what seems to be a wasteland. But to the people involved in the war, it's a land worth fighting for. The Western Sahara, a desert nation the size of Colorado, is located on the west coast of Africa. It's the site of one of the world's largest deposits of phosphate and could have substantial untapped reserves of petroleum and iron ore. For these and other reasons, neighboring Morocco is occupying the Western Sahara, claiming it as part of Morocco's ancient empire. The Sahrawis, the indigenous people of the Western Sahara, are fighting against Morocco for their independence. Their small, desert guerrilla army is pitted against Morocco's modern, well-equipped armed forces. The United States is one of the main suppliers of weapons to Morocco, even though the Moroccan occupation of the Western Sahara is condemned internationally. The Reagan administration justifies its support of Morocco by putting top value on our friendship with that country.
Morocco, for 2 decades, has been a close and valued friend of the United States. They are a moderate Arab state. They are very helpful in terms of a series of initiatives in Africa. They are a strategically important country bordering on the Atlantic and on the Mediterranean. And they have been consistently supportive of the United States of America.
Another African country that's been friendly with the United States of America is Nigeria. Yet, its foreign minister feels the United States has chosen to support the wrong side.
For the United States, champion of justice, freedom, and rights of people to be on the side of the oppressor, as it were, it's a really very sad affair, and one sincerely hopes that the U.S. administrations would consider this matter in this light and pull out as best as they could, because you might say in the short run, U.S. may need to protect its strategic interests and friendships and so on, but in the long run, it's really creating a very bad name and very bad image for itself in Africa as a whole.
The real problem that ought to concern us in the Western Sahara is the potential which this conflict has for significant escalation, and the extent to which, if it should spill over into Morocco and Algeria, it could create a situation in which our own country and possibly the Soviet Union could be dragged in as well.
What today could become a superpower conflict started out as a simple regional struggle. The Western Sahara had been a colony of Spain since the end of the 19th century. But like the other people of Africa, the Sahrawis wanted to be free. So in 1973, the people of the Sahara began a war of independence against the Spanish colonialists. Their liberation movement was called the Polisario Front. After 2 years of battle with the Polisario, the Spanish decided to pull out.
At the time that the Spaniards disengaged, they had an inalienable legal obligation to give the people of that territory, as a territory, the right to make a decision as to what their future government was going to be. That's the way it was done everywhere else. Why not in the Western Sahara? The people of Western Sahara never had that right.
Instead of granting the Sahrawi people the right to choose their own government, the Spanish divided the Western Sahara into two and gave it away, the upper 2/3 to Morocco and the bottom third to Mauritania. When Morocco and Mauritania moved in their armed forces to secure their new territory, the Sahrawi people loyal to the Polisario Front became a target. An eyewitness whose foot was burned by napalm during a Moroccan air attack gives this account.
The planes came to bomb us on a Sunday at 11 a.m. in February of 1976. Many people were killed. During the attack, women who were pregnant had miscarriages. The limbs of children were blown off. Some were burned like ashes. The first day, the planes came back 3 times to bomb us. They came back every day that week to bomb again and again. The women fled. Those who were not hurt carried their children on their backs. We had to flee on foot. Thank God. The Polisario guerrillas found us. They got us out of there by capturing enemy vehicles to transport us to safety in Algeria. The Moroccans never broke our determination. No matter how long it takes, we must have our freedom and dignity. And even the last old Sahrawi lady like me will fight.
When all of the refugees were assembled in Algeria, a country that's always provided refuge to liberation movements, the Polisario began training its new recruits. Soon, its guerrilla army grew to a force of several thousand well-trained men. Their objective, to reclaim their homeland from the Moroccans. At the same time, Polisario followers were building the infrastructure for a nation. On February 27, 1976, they declared themselves a republic. Once a year, all Polisario supporters joined together to celebrate the birth of their nation. Today, their government in exile is recognized by 46 nations, but not by the United States. The U.S. remains one of the main suppliers of weapons to the government of Morocco. But we may be on the losing side. The guerrillas have regained control of 9/10 of the Western Sahara, even though they are outnumbered 10-to-1 by the Moroccan armed forces. Today, Morocco occupies only this small portion of the contested territory. To keep from losing it, the Moroccan army built a fortified defense wall around the entire area. I was airlifted to Morocco's front lines by Army helicopter. Ras Al Hamra has been the site of several major battles because this is where the defense wall begins. Being the first American journalist to report on this war, I received the full cooperation of the Moroccan government. During a 10-day tour of the war zones, I would visit nearly every major Moroccan military base and outpost in southern Morocco and the Western Sahara. Heavily armed Moroccan soldiers provided protection for me the entire time I was there. The colonel of Ras Al Hamra took me to his command post for a briefing on the defense wall and the strategy the Moroccan army is using in this desert war.
The Moroccan armed forces built a defense wall that begins here in Ras Al Hamra and extends over 400 kilometers. The end of the wall is 30 kilometers south of the capital, Al Ayoun. It's impossible for the enemy to penetrate the defense wall. Every 20 kilometers along this wall, there's a major resistance center, as you see here. The soldiers have collective as well as individual weapons. The wall itself is defended by mines, barbed wires, and trenches. We also have radar surveillance over the entire area, which allows us to detect personnel and vehicles within a 60-kilometer radius. Information from the radar is available to our light armored intervention forces situated 10 to 15 kilometers behind each resistance center. These intervention forces rush to the aid of the men at the wall in case of attack.
Although the wall area appears to be heavily fortified, Moroccan military officers claim they need even more weapons to fight the war effectively. The colonel at Zag, one of the most important military bases in southern Morocco, gave me his views.
The Sahara is a vast country. To control all of it, you need an army the size of the Chinese army.
Is there any kind of weapons that you need to fight the kind of war you have with the Polisario?
Indeed, we are patiently waiting to receive American weapons, because our neighbors are armed to the teeth by the Soviets. The military was very disappointed because we did not receive the weapons Morocco had wanted and asked for. After all, we are the traditional allies and friends of the Western world and the United States.
The colonel made it clear that there is hostility here on the Moroccan front towards the United States because Morocco's first request for military assistance was met with reluctance. Around the times that the arms package was being considered in the United States, there were reports of low morale in the Moroccan army.
During the Carter administration, the morale was low indeed. Why? Because the United States refused to help its friend. Morocco is one of the friends of the US, and Carter always turned his back on us.
In 1979, the king himself raised the complaint that the United States was letting down its friends. His complaint came in the midst of intense lobbying by Morocco for US military assistance.
I think the United States are now still shocked by the Vietnam War. And they not make the difference between an intervention from United States and the help from United States to their friends.
The king's request for military assistance created a policy debate at the White House. The president's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, urged the Carter administration to sell the king the weapons he was asking for.
Morocco is a moderate Arab state that by and large has been quite decent in respect to the Arab-Israeli dispute and has exercised a moderating influence on other Arab attitudes. It certainly, I believe, is in our interest for the Arab world to become more moderate, more accommodating. And we can only achieve that if we stand fast when our friends get into a jam, even if they get into that jam of their own making, which perhaps was the case here. But once they're in a jam, you don't point your finger and say, well, you shouldn't have gotten into a jam and we're going to watch you sink. You help them.
Did you support the policy of allowing Morocco to use U.S. weapons in the Western Sahara, outside their internationally recognized borders?
I was deeply supportive of the human rights policy of non-proliferation and so forth,
But I did not feel that in the circumstances of the real world in which we found ourselves, we could simply afford to let our friends down when they are confronting genuine security problems. This doesn't mean that I felt that Morocco was right in every respect in its policy towards the so-called Polisario. But I did feel that, on balance, we had to stand by Morocco, we had to be helpful, and we had to be helpful in a tangible and meaningful way.
On January 24, 1980, the policy debate ended in a victory for King Hassan II. President Carter approved the sale of a large package of counterinsurgency weapons for use in the war in the Western Sahara. Critics of the decision charged that United States weapons would escalate the conflict. But according to the President's Moroccan ambassador, the aim of the weapons was to bring King Hassan to the negotiating table.
The presidential policy was based upon the conviction that negotiations were the best avenue to peace and stability in Northwest Africa, and that the best way to ensure negotiations and to ensure that the king would come to the bargaining table was to strengthen his hand. What really counted was the fact that the United States was willing to support the policy of strengthening him so that he could negotiate. He felt a great deal more reassurance to have the United States understanding of his position.
The arms sales to Morocco included 20 F-5 fighters. Total cost, $170 million. 6 OV-10 Broncos, described as one of the deadliest and most versatile light strike counterinsurgency aircraft in the world, were also included. Total cost of the arms package, over $232 million, which Morocco couldn't afford, so the King of Saudi Arabia, monarch of another moderate Arab state, picked up the tab. Today in Morocco, the war machine is gobbling up nearly $3 million a day. Morocco